Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are embarking on a pretty major undertaking. We're trying to move past an image that has become, maybe one of the most recognizable in all of modern art history.
It really has.
We are diving deep into the life and, more importantly, the work of Frida Kahlo.
And it's so essential that we do this because when you see Frida's image today and you see it, you see it literally everywhere.
Everywhere.
Art museums, sure, but also on, T-shirts, coffee mugs, massive commercial billboards. You see the defiant stare, the flowers in her hair, that signature unibrow.
Right, the icon.
Exactly. And our sources really remind us that this iconic status, it risks flattening her profound genius into a simple, almost decorative commodity.
That is the absolute core of our mission today. We need to move beyond that easily digestible icon and really explore her work for what it was.
Which was?
A profound, a radically sincere expression of her entire and often agonizing existence. We're looking for the truth that's hiding behind the aesthetic.
And our sources, they paint a picture of a life that was just utterly defined by a few key things. First, catastrophic trauma.
Yes.
Second, an unwavering lifelong quest for her own identity. And third, a fierce rejection of labels, even when those labels came from the highest echelons of the art world.
You mean like Andre Breton, the father of surrealism, basically trying to claim her?
Exactly that. So her legacy isn't just about the beautiful or shocking artwork she left behind. It's a template for visceral survival.
And that's where we start digging in. The hook that should really draw you in is that Frida's self-portraits are fundamentally not about vanity. They're not even about traditional beauty.
Not at all.
They are, as one of our sources so powerfully put it, visceral, heartbreaking statements about trauma and survival. She wasn't painting what she saw in the mirror. She was painting what she felt in her shattered spine. And when you actually sit with the paintings, really look at them, they are frequently bizarre, they're uncomfortable, and they're intensely surprising. And that's where we're going to begin. So, to understand anything about Frida, the foundation, it has to be the physical reality of her life. Her entire trajectory was permanently, violently derailed by an absolute catastrophe when she was just 18 years old.
18. In 1925, it was a shocking, brutal event. A tram collided with the bus she was riding.
And the injuries she sustained, they weren't minor. They were comprehensive, life-altering.
Yeah, that's the word. This wasn't a case of a painful recovery period. She had a triple fracture of her pelvis, fractures in several ribs, her vertebrae or collarbone was broken.
And then the most infamous injury.
The iron handrail. It impaled her, went straight through her body, causing just devastating internal injuries that guaranteed a lifetime of surgical interventions, of constant chronic physical agony.
Right. And it also created this deep, this chronic feeling that she described as being out of place in her own body.
Out of place in her own body. That's such a powerful phrase.
I think we often just hear bus accident and we don't register the sheer severity of it. The sources say she underwent over 30 surgical procedures in her lifetime.
30. Can you imagine? So this wasn't a phase of recovery. This became her permanent condition, her reality.
Exactly. And it is this enforced stillness, this long, agonizing period of recovery that miraculously becomes the birthplace of her art.
Art became her essential lifeline. Think about it. She was confined, often encased in these restrictive plaster and steel corsets. She needed a way to translate that feeling, both the internal and the external confinement.
So it wasn't just a hobby to pass the time. It wasn't about relieving boredom.
No, not at all. The act of painting became her primary mode of survival, of introspection.
Yeah.
And the sources point to this pivotal moment. It was her mother who arranged for a special, adjustable easel to be built, one that would allow Frida to paint while she was lying flat on her back in bed.
Which is more than just a practical solution, right? It fundamentally dictated her subject matter.
It had to. When you are confined in such a way, when your own body is the source of all your suffering in your entire world, where else can your gaze possibly turn but inward?
The mandatory introspection, that's what birthed the unflinching self-portrait tradition that she's so famous for.
And when you look at those early works, they are undeniably raw. They're reflections of trauma, not romanticized images of a young girl. She was using the canvas like a forensic tool.
A forensic tool, I like that. To make sense of the damage that was inflicted upon her.
She was just absolutely unflinching. We have these specific, devastating examples in her work. Think about the painting where she visualizes her broken spine.
The broken column.
Yes. It's not just damaged, it's portrayed as an ancient architectural column, cracked and crumbling, and it's only held together by these flimsy, almost decorative-looking ribbons.
It's so fragile.
And then there's another piece where her face is adorned with a crown of thorns, a very clear reference to Christ's passion. But the thorns are physically connected to this prominent bleeding heart that's also exposed on her chest.
The combination of that, surgical frankness, the exposed body, the medical reality, and then layering it with religious or mythological symbolism is just, it's so potent.
It is.
She's basically taking her medical chart and turning it into a devastating piece of poetry.
That's her genius. As one source commented, illustrating your ongoing surgical needs using religious iconography is, and I'm quoting here, not exactly your typical teenage art project.
No. Not at all. It was this radical, almost documentary-like commitment to depicting her truth. She was translating chronic pain, which is invisible to the outside world, into a visual language that anyone could understand, or at least confront. That focus on the internal reality, the pain that nobody else can see, that's what makes the interpretation of her work so crucial. We always talk about her resilience, but what about the argument that painting pain so relentlessly is actually a form of perpetual victimhood, even if she rejected that label herself?
That is a vital, critical question. And what's so fascinating here is how she manipulated that perspective. Because while she painted pain over and over, she consistently rejected victimhood.
How so?
She used pain not to wallow, not to invite pity, but to expose and explore, and ultimately to transform her inner world. She took her suffering and turned it into this productive, creative tool for self-exploration, and crucially, a form of public ownership.
So it was an assertion of power.
Absolutely.
Her art became a way of stating, this is the truth of my existence, and I am the one who controls how you view it, even its most broken and painful aspects.
Precisely. She wasn't trying to hide the physical injuries. She was elevating them into symbols of a unique kind of strength, of survival. By putting that cracked column or those bleeding arteries right there on display, she was forcing the viewer to confront her vulnerability, and in doing so, she neutralized its power over her.
That defiant act of exposure, that's the foundational act of her entire artistic career, isn't it?
It is. It wasn't about seeking pity. It was about stating, completely unapologetically, this is who I am now. I was forged by this experience, and I am still here.
That really establishes the baseline for everything that comes after. All her subsequent work, even when it shifts to, cultural or political themes, it's all fundamentally rooted in this raw bodily truth-telling.
And that relentless personal struggle, it instantly connects to a much bigger thing that would run throughout her entire life: identity, which in the context of Mexico in the 1930s becomes an intensely political topic.
Okay, so we move from the trauma that, in a way, created the artist to the complex, layered identity that informed nearly all of her subject matter. And Frida's identity was just. It was defined by this foundational duality.
She existed in a constant set of contrasts. She was the daughter of a German immigrant father and a mother of indigenous and Spanish descent.
So she was both European and Mexican, right from the start.
Right. She was a woman who actively and very often publicly rejected typical gender norms of the time. She was this fierce, incredible artist, yet she often felt marginalized or misunderstood by the European art circles that were so quick to embrace her husband, Diego Rivera.
So her art became the space where she could explore all of that.
It became the dedicated, ongoing exploration of what it meant to be her, a rich mosaic of conflicting yet somehow powerfully integrated identities.
And this duality connects immediately to her vibrant political use of her Mexican heritage. We have to stress this point because it's so much more than just a decorative choice of bright colors or folk aesthetics.
Which is often how it's marketed today, right?
Exactly.
But for Frida, it was a profound political choice. The adoption and this relentless embrace of indigenous Mexican symbols, specifically the elaborate Tijuana dress and pre-Columbian iconography, it was a conscious statement of cultural reclamation.
And direct resistance.
And direct resistance against Mexico's deeply embedded history of colonialism.
Let's unpack that choice of the Tijuana dress. Why that specific indigenous style? What did it represent?
Well, the Tijuana style comes from the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, a region in Oaxaca, and it's known historically for its strong, matriarchal indigenous society. So the women there were seen as powerful, economically independent.
So by consistently wearing this costume, she wasn't just being patriotic.
Not at all. She was signaling solidarity with indigenous cultures, and crucially, she was aligning herself with these powerful female archetypes.
And this was happening at a time in post-revolutionary Mexico when the government was trying to create this one unified national identity, right?
Right.
Often by sort of suppressing indigenous heritage.
Exactly. So Frida's choice was a bold assertion of indigenous worth and a rejection of European beauty standards, all at the same time. She was essentially using her physical presentation, her body, and her art to assert Mexico's cultural independence from European and American aesthetic constraints.
She was positioning her style, the vibrant colors, the traditional textiles, the flowers in her hair, as a definitive assertion of Mexican mestizaje identity.
Yes, an identity that embraced the mix of cultures, but celebrated and centered the indigenous roots above all else. She was asserting cultural self-determination through fashion and through paint.
And the most iconic illustration of this complexity, and you could argue it's the first major visual manifesto of her maturity as an artist, has to be her 1939 painting, The Two Fridas.
Oh, for sure.
Let's really analyze the mechanics of this piece.
The Two Fridas is just a stunning, large-scale visual representation of her internal conflict. She literally painted herself twice, sitting side by side against this stormy, dramatic sky. It's almost like two aspects of her soul, separated but both visible.
And they're dressed so differently.
Completely. The Frida on the right is in the traditional, fiercely nationalistic Tijuana clothing. That symbolizes the Frida that Diego loved, the one who fully embraced her Mexican roots.
And the Frida on the left.
She's in a white, very formal European-style Victorian wedding dress. This represents her European side, the Frida who felt rejected after her divorce from Rivera, and maybe even the colonial influence she was constantly grappling with.
But the brilliance of the composition is that they are fundamentally connected, right? Despite the stark difference in their clothing and what they represent.
Precisely. They are physically linked. They have exposed shared hearts and a single bloodline. You can see it. The Mexican Frida's heart is healthy, and it pumps blood through a vein that connects to the European Frida's heart.
Which is damaged, it's bleeding.
It's actively damaged and bleeding onto her white dress. So this isn't a simple choice between two identities. It's this terrifying depiction of dual heritage being a source of agonizing vulnerability, but also shared life.
The bloodline is the key.
The bloodline is the key. It asserts that her dual nature isn't a weakness that's tearing her apart, but a necessary shared life force. It's what keeps both of them alive.
That is so profound. And the sources show her inspiration went even deeper than modern folk art. She was looking way back into ancient traditions.
Oh, absolutely. She was profoundly influenced by the symbolism and the aesthetic of pre-Columbian Mexican art. This shows up in her frequent use of objects like obsidian knives or monkeys and specific vibrant color palettes. She was consciously creating a visual language that bridged the chasm between ancient culture and modern identity.
And you can see it in the style itself. The colors are so bold and saturated. Her lines are strong. It feels like a deliberate rejection of those muted academic traditions of European art.
It was. And she didn't just use these symbols around her in the paintings. She employed them directly onto her own body in the self-portraits. She was always leaning into the painful or uncomfortable aspects of existence, as we saw with the thorns earlier.
That is the uncompromising portrayal we see again and again. You can look at the self-portrait with thorn necklace and hummingbird from 1940. It shows this stark tension.
Yes, the thorn necklace. It's an undeniable symbol of pain and suffering, and it's acting like a ligature around her neck, literally choking her. But then hanging from it is this tiny black dead hummingbird.
Wait a second. I always thought the hummingbird was a symbol of hope or love. Why would it be dead?
It is a symbol of life and love in Mexican folk culture, you're right. But specifically, it's associated with destiny and rebirth. It was used in love charms.
So by painting it dead.
By painting it dead, she's suggesting that the life and love she desires, and this often ties back to the fertility and familial connection she struggled with because of the accident, that it's being choked or stifled by her suffering, by the thorns.
But she wears it so defiantly.
That's the thing, she wears it defiantly. The thorns represent the pain of her existence, but the way she holds her head high, staring directly at you, suggests she wears this suffering as a complicated badge of honor. It's part of who she is.
So she used her physical being and these dense, contrasting symbols as tools for this deep psychological self-exploration. She was examining exactly how her identity had been shaped by both overwhelming physical struggles and this deeply felt cultural pride.
It became clear that her art wasn't just an emotional outburst. It was a highly complex narrative about the formation of a self through continual adversity and cultural assertion.
And that intensity, that focus on her inner reality, is exactly why the European art world in particular got so confused about where to place her.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to the great surrealism debate. Let's tackle this major art historical controversy head on because it's a big one. Was Frida Kahlo a surrealist? Because if you just look at her images, the floating figures, the exposed organs, the strange menagerie of pets, it certainly feels like it could be.
The visual evidence is compelling. I mean, you can't deny it, which is why when André Breton, the renowned, Pope of Surrealism, came to Mexico in 1938 and saw her work,
Yeah.
he was instantly captivated.
He immediately just claimed her as one of his own.
He did, enthusiastically. He dubbed her a surrealist and started trying to organize exhibitions for her in Paris and New York. He saw her as this sort of natural, intuitive surrealist who had emerged from the primitive world.
Which is a bit condescending in itself.
Very. But Frida, never one to accept labels imposed by external forces, especially not from a European man, issued this famous and definitive rejection of that classification.
Her quote has become legendary in our history, hasn't it?
It has, and it perfectly encapsulates the difference between her work and the European movement. She said, "They thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality."
That is just so straightforward, so unapologetic, and it fundamentally defines her entire aesthetic approach.
It does.
But let's not dismiss the visual overlap too quickly, because despite her rejection, her work clearly shares elements that the surrealists prized. Imagery drawn from the subconscious, the irrational, dreamlike qualities. Her paintings exposed her deepest emotional turmoil in ways that felt otherworldly.
The visual vocabulary is undeniably shared. Surrealism, as a movement, seeks to access the unconscious mind, and Frida's paintings often feature imagery that comes straight from the depths of her psyche. But the critical difference is the grounding factor.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Britain's surrealism, which was heavily influenced by Freud, was interested in the universal subconscious, things derived from dreams and psychoanalysis. Frida's fantasy, her surreal imagery, was tethered directly to the hard facts of her life, her pain, her body.
So let's analyze how her real-life trauma produced such surreal imagery. How it made the images feel, as some critics argued, more real than any nightmare.
We can go back to the Broken column from 1944. The imagery is terrifyingly surreal. Her body is literally split open, held together by this medical corset, revealing that cracked ionic column where her spine should be.
And the nails. Her skin is pierced with dozens of nails.
It looks like a fever dream, a nightmare of fragmentation.
But the underlying reality is that this imagery is a factual symptom of her life, isn't it? The column represents her actual shattered spine. The nails represent the constant, acute, stabbing pain she felt in different parts of her body. The corset was a physical necessity she had to wear for months at a time.
Precisely. Unlike someone like Salvador Dali, whose work explored the general, shared world of subconscious anxiety and dreams, often influenced by theoretical physics or philosophy, Frida was interested in depicting the world as she saw it, filtered only through the intensely personal lens of her specific pain, her specific love, and her specific cultural survival.
So it was a projection of her inner world, but it was intensely grounded in a personal struggle that was very, very real.
Exactly.
But let's play devil's advocate for a moment, as the sources ask us to. Some critics still insist she has to be considered a surrealist. I mean, she did participate in their exhibitions. She used their symbolic language.
And that's a valid critical position. She certainly utilized the vocabulary, the use of strange juxtapositions, symbolic anatomy, a sense of magical realism.
Yeah.
Those are all hallmarks. But critics who defend her distinction often point to the difference between European and Mexican surrealism.
There's a difference.
A huge one. Mexican art has a deep, pre-existing tradition of what we now call magical realism, where the fantastical and the mythological blend seamlessly with the everyday. It's rooted in folklore and indigenous beliefs that were there long before Britain ever showed up.
Ah, so while European surrealism was looking for answers in Freud and dreams, Mexican art naturally embraced the strange and the magical as just part of reality.
Exactly. For Frida, depicting a bleeding heart or a man emerging from a flower wasn't an irrational dream construct. It was a way of externalizing an emotional state, using a deeply embedded cultural vocabulary that already existed. We have to talk about the skeletal dog, Esselot, for instance.
Yes, the skeletal dog that's mentioned in her big cosmic embrace painting, The Love Embrace of the Universe from 1949. Who is Xolotl, and why would she include a creature like that?
Xolotl is a profound and complex figure in Aztec mythology. He's the god of lightning, of twins, of monstrosity, and most importantly, he is often depicted as a guide for the soul through Mictlan, the underworld. He's a companion to the dead and a harbinger of transformation.
So, by including Exolol, she's not just painting a weird-looking pet.
No, she is invoking a deep pre-Columbian connection to duality, to death, and to the transformation that follows great suffering.
It completely reframes the piece.
It does. When she includes Exolot alongside her self-portrait Diego and the cosmos, she is using this complex, ancient framework to process her own existential reality, her physical suffering, her inability to bear children, and her tumultuous relationship with Diego, which often felt like a spiritual and physical death and rebirth for her.
So the boundary between the real and the unreal was just incredibly blurry for her, because she was operating in a space where mythology and painful physical existence were constantly overlapping.
That is the ultimate takeaway, I think. Her work was intensely direct. It was focused on making her specific truth visible, regardless of how painful or bizarre the resulting imagery might be.
And this uncompromising truth-telling is what really sets her apart. It makes her a radical realist in surrealist clothes.
A perfect way to put it.
Okay, let's pivot now to how this intensely personal, radical, realist art became such a powerful political statement. The sources often refer to her works as visual manifestos, because Frida didn't just passively absorb political ideas, she internalized them and then expressed them through the most personal medium possible, her own body.
Well, her immersion in political ideology was heavily influenced by her husband, Diego Rivera, the famous communist muralist.
Right, and Rivera's work was all about these sweeping public statements, about the revolution, the workers, Mexican history, grand narratives.
Grand narratives on a grand scale. Frida absorbed those specific communist and anti-imperialist ideas, but she channeled them inward. She used her self-portraits to declare her beliefs and her position in the social and class landscape.
So what were the specific political ideas she absorbed, and how did her approach differ so much from Diego's massive public murals?
Rivera was a key figure in the Mexican school of muralism, which promoted revolutionary ideals, anti-capitalism, and indigenous empowerment. Frida shared that fierce anti-colonial pro-indigenous sentiment, but as you said, Diego communicated this on city walls for the masses.
And Frida?
Frida, often confined by her body, used her own small canvas to communicate the political truths of the individual. She showed that the personal body, a woman's body, a disabled body, a mixed-race body, is itself a political territory.
So her passionate pride in her Mexican heritage, which we talked about earlier, wasn't just cultural appreciation. It was a powerful critique, a form of defiance against the systems of power that had oppressed Mexico for centuries.
Absolutely. Her embrace of the Tijuana dress, her use of pre-Columbian iconography, this was her direct response to colonialism and class struggle. She was making a powerful argument that Mexican identity, particularly its indigenous roots, was inherently revolutionary and needed to be championed over European aesthetic and political dominance.
And we see this defiance most clearly when she actively challenges established societal expectations, particularly those placed upon women in the 1940s. Let's analyze Self-Portrait with Cropped Hair from 1940.
An incredible painting. It is a staggering visual confrontation with established gender norms and is painted shortly after her first divorce from Rivera.
The full title is something like "The Hair is Cut with the Same Knife," right?
Something like that, yes.
That's all.
And in it, she's depicted sitting in this vast, empty space, wearing an oversized, dark gray men's suit. Possibly one of Diego's. She's holding a pair of scissors.
And her hair, her signature long braided hair, which was so intrinsically linked to her feminine nationalist identity, it's gone.
It's gone. It lies scattered all around her on the floor like a pile of dead snakes. She is literally shedding her previous image, the image that Diego supposedly admired so much, and asserting that she refuses to be defined by his or by society's expectations of femininity.
It's a definitive assertion of autonomy. By wearing the suit and cutting her hair, she's claiming masculine identity traits and power. The scissors themselves are a symbol of that power, a sharp tool for decisive action.
And then there are the lyrics of a Mexican folk song inscribed on the top of the painting. It says something like, "Look, if I loved you, it was because of your hair. Now that you are without hair, I don't love you anymore."
So she's mocking the idea that her worth or her lovability is tied to a conventional feminine aesthetic.
She's throwing it right back in their faces.
Yeah.
This action, painting herself in a man's suit, must have been a highly potent act of resistance against the rigid gender roles dictated by both traditional society and, frankly, the often misogynistic political cultures of the time.
It was radical candor. This defiance was directed at traditional societal norms, but also at the communist ideologies that, ironically, often dictated very rigid roles for women within the revolutionary structure.
Yes, it was an act of personal resistance against any external control over her body and her appearance.
It's just incredible how she scales her personal pain to resonate with these broader social issues. She turns her individual struggle, whether it's physical or emotional, into a symbol for collective suffering.
That connection is the key to her political genius. While the broken column obviously depicts her personal physical pain, it simultaneously functioned as a symbol for the collective suffering of the oppressed.
How so?
By depicting her body as shattered, pierced, and struggling under heavy restraints, she was implying that society itself, the political structures, the colonial legacy, the capitalist exploitation, was broken and inflicting systemic pain, and that it needed radical repair.
So her activism manifested not in painting grand murals about the proletariat like Rivera, but in this intensely personal assertion of her identity and the honest portrayal of her vulnerability and her pain.
Precisely. Her body became her manifesto. There's a final, fascinating twist to this political defiance, her resistance against the art world itself.
Which was overwhelmingly male-dominated and academically structured.
Completely. She certainly didn't fit the mold of the typical 1940s female artist trying to gain entry into the official establishment.
She didn't follow their rules.
Not at all. She created art that was intensely personal, emotionally exposed, vulnerable, and raw, often painful to look at. In a system that valued historical narrative, grand scale, and abstract technique, she focused on direct, figurative truth, using a small, self-contained format.
This commitment to bearing her soul was revolutionary in its own right. It challenged the norms of a male-dominated artistic establishment and proved that intimate work could have vast political implications.
She painted her truth, regardless of the discomfort it caused the viewer. And in doing so, she transcended mere aesthetics to create this universal story of struggle, survival, and resilience.
And that universality, coupled with her iconic visual presentation, is exactly what defines her complicated and often paradoxical legacy today. So we've established the trauma, the complex identity, the artistic context, and the visual manifestos. Now, let's wrap this up by looking at why Frida Kahlo still matters so profoundly today, nearly a century after her earliest works. What is that timeless universality that continues to resonate?
I think it's because she painted the deepest struggles of anyone who has ever felt marginalized, oppressed, or misunderstood. Her paintings are a defiant shout that reminds us of the power of radical authenticity.
Right.
By being so relentlessly honest about her own complicated, fractured existence, physical, emotional, cultural, she inadvertently gave a visual language to countless others who felt voiceless.
And this defiance cemented her status as a crucial feminist icon, even though she didn't necessarily paint for the formalized movement, did she?
No, she didn't. But her art became a beacon for feminist ideals because she shattered the conventional idealized image of women. She refused to hide the aspects of womanhood that were traditionally taboo.
Like physical pain, miscarriage.
Miscarriage, complicated sexual identity, emotional suffering. She painted herself as unapologetically strong and vulnerable at the same time. Her personal defiance, her refusal to be a quiet, passive figure, inherently aligned with the broader ideals of women's rights and self-assertion that gained momentum later on.
And beyond feminism, we have to acknowledge her critical role as a queer icon. This comes from her open bisexuality and her fluid expression of gender and sexuality.
And this openness was extraordinarily radical for her time, especially within the very conservative social norms of the early to mid-20th century. She openly embraced relationships with both men and women.
And her gender fluidity.
Exactly. We see it especially in pieces like the self-portrait with cropped hair, where she claims a masculine aesthetic. It meant she just didn't conform to heteronormative expectations. Her unapologetic self-expression paved a critical path for others navigating identity outside traditional confines, making her a crucial foundational symbol for the LGBTQ+ community.
Her impact isn't just social and political, though. She fundamentally shifted the artistic landscape. What permission did she give modern artists that they didn't have before?
I think the sources are very clear on this.
Hmm.
She gave modern artists permission to be personal in an unprecedentedly intimate and bodily way.
Mm.
Before Frida, self-portraits were not typically used to expose raw personal suffering and psychological turmoil with such surgical frankness. She showed that art should be about truth and about bearing one's soul, the good, the bad, the broken, not just about technical skill or classical beauty. She proved that vulnerability is a superpower in art.
Okay, now, we cannot conclude this without addressing the massive elephant in the room,
The Frida merch.
a commodification paradox. Her image, the flowers, the unibrow, the iconic Tijuana dresses, that defiant stare, it is globally ubiquitous.
It's a staggering global phenomenon.
Uh-huh.
Her likeness is on everything imaginable, and the paradox is acute. Here you have an artist who is intensely personal, anti-capitalist, deeply political.
And yet her image has been mass-marketed globally, far beyond her original intent, and often stripped entirely of its political and painful context.
Entirely.
As the sources point out, critics often argue this commodification trivializes her work. It neutralizes the resistance she stood for. Isn't the true paradox that the very systems she resisted have now turned her into a safe, marketable symbol?
That is a sharp observation, and it cuts right to the heart of the debate. When a high-end fashion line or a corporate marketing campaign uses her image, they are typically selling the aesthetic of defiance, the colorful folk art and the bold stare, while quietly omitting the pain, the communism, and the physical suffering that inform that defiance.
The complexity is erased.
It's erased in favor of a commercially palatable symbol.
So if her image is used to sell things, does it still retain any genuine meaning of resistance?
It creates this fascinating duality in consumer culture, because while the initial meaning is definitely diluted by mass production, her immense popularity also signifies profound cultural relevance. People buy the Frida mug or the Frida poster because they recognize, on some level, the inherent spirit of nonconformity and strength she embodied.
So for many people, that image still symbolizes resistance, a reminder to be unapologetically authentic.
I think it does, even if the corporate entity selling it has absolutely no interest in her politics.
So ultimately, her legacy is defined by courage, defiance, and truth. She painted to survive, using communication to tell authentic stories of survival. She provided a roadmap for living authentically and unapologetically.
She proved that art is a powerful tool for self-reclamation, for giving a voice to the marginalized, and that the story of personal suffering can become the engine of a universal artistic truth. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow, that was an intensive and a really detailed examination of an artist whose depth is often masked by her own fame. So let's synthesize the 3 key takeaways we extracted from the source material for you.
First, we established that Frida's art isn't merely biographical painting. It's an unflinching exploration of personal pain, of fluid identity, and profound resilience. And that is why it remains so universally relatable across cultures and generations.
Second, her influence goes far beyond the canvas itself. It's what makes her a potent and enduring symbol for feminist and LGBTQ plus movements, all because of her boundary-breaking personal life and her radical artistic honesty.
And third, her legacy is a powerful reminder that true art isn't solely about adhering to technique or fitting into some external aesthetic category like surrealism. It's about telling our most authentic stories, the raw, the complicated, sometimes painful narratives, regardless of how vulnerable or uncomfortable they might make us or the viewer.
And finally, we want to leave you with one provocative thought to mull over as you move forward, building directly on the source material we explored today. Given that Frida used her dual, sometimes conflicting identity, Mexican and European, masculine and feminine, healthy and broken, as a primary source of her strength and her artistic resistance, how can we apply her lesson about embracing the contradictory or marginalized parts of our own identities to forge personal power and authentic expression in the complex world we all navigate today?
Think about that act of radical self-acceptance. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.
We'll see you next time.